Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's version of MOS Live. We are doing a virtual planetarium, the sky tonight. My name is Katie. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm going to be helping our educator out today by keeping an eye out for any questions or comments you have in the Q&A here in Zoom. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, thank you so much for joining us, but please know we can't actually see those questions or comments at this time. But if you are on Zoom, you can head to that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to enter in your questions or comments. If you'd like to see closed captions, hit that button at the bottom that says CC. And at this point, I invite our presenter to turn on their camera and introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Talia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am going to be your presenter today, talking to you about some things that you're going to be able to see in the sky tonight and for the next several nights. So to do that, I'm going to share my screen. And today we're using a program called Stellarium, which is a free open source program. So it is available to you if you would like to go take a look at it. And I have it set for tonight at 5:30. At which point it will be dark, because last week we fell back. So now the sun is setting a little after 4:30. So it's getting dark really nice and early. And we still have some sun glow over in the very, very west, but by 5:30, it's basically dark. And we have a couple of things to look for, most of which are things you've already probably seen if you've watched this show before. I like to start in the north. And you might, first off, see a pattern that you recognize. It's one we've talked about several times before. It's one that a lot of people have heard of. Right here, this shape, 7 stars, 1, 2, 3 stars in the handle, and 1, 2, 3, 4 in the bowl. So this is a pretty famous group of stars. In North America, we usually call it the Big Dipper. It does have different names around the world. It's a wagon, or a plow, or a boat, depending on what part of the world you're in. And that is actually true of most of these star patterns I'm showing you. They actually have very different names from different cultures from all over the world. We tend to use the Greek and Roman ones as the official names in the official constellations. So those are the ones I'm going to be talking about. But always remember that just because the Greeks saw this as one thing doesn't mean that the rest of the world did. And there's hundreds of sets of constellations from different groups of people from all over the world. Now, the funny thing is that the Greeks did not see the Big Dipper as a constellation at all. The Big Dipper is not actually a constellation. It is a piece of a constellation. And this is, although the Big Dipper is a very famous constellation, the rest of or famous group of stars, the rest of the constellation is not quite as easy to spot, especially at this time of year. I'm going to go ahead and put the constellation lines up there, and you can maybe see what I mean. You can see that the bottom of the constellation is actually starting to set. Now, from here in Boston, the Big Dipper, this part of the constellation, never actually sets. It gets very, very low in the north, but it doesn't actually go below the horizon. It's what we call circumpolar. Circumpolar means going around the pole. And it has to do with the fact that Boston is in the northern hemisphere. So we're almost halfway up the northern hemisphere. It means there's a nice big chunk of the northern sky that we always can see that's never below the horizon. We call that the circumpolar sky. That does mean that there is a nice big chunk of the southern sky that we never see. So we'll never see those constellations, but it means that this northern patch of sky over here is always above the horizon for us. And that includes the Big Dipper, which is part of this constellation right here. And go ahead and in the Q&A, even if you know what this is supposed to be, if you know what it's supposed to be, then you know it doesn't look like what it is supposed to be. So regardless of whether or not you know what it is, tell me what you think it looks like. What would you have named it? And there's, of course, no wrong answer for this. It's just whatever you think it looks like.
I'm thinking it looks like kind of a long-necked, 4-footed animal.
Long-necked, 4-footed animal.
Let's see what else we have coming in. A deer,
Mm-hmm.
a long neck, 4 four-legged, I should say, animal. Fox or a dog. And we do have a guess for the Big Dipper.
Mm-hmm. So I like the idea of a long-legged animal, a long-necked animal rather, because you've got the handle of the dipper extending off here looking like a long neck. Except it turns out this isn't the front of the animal. This is an animal, but this isn't the front. This is the front. And that means this animal has a very long tail, and it's not supposed to. This is in fact supposed to be a bear, which you may or may not have known, but this constellation's name is Ursa Major, the Great Bear. If you're wondering why you didn't see a bear there, it's because this is a strange looking bear. It has a really long tail. And the story, the Greek story, again, is that Zeus, who was the king of the Greek gods, decided to take this bear, which lived on Earth and had a normal stubby tail. He decided to take the bear and throw it into the sky. And in the process, he grabbed it by the tail and he swung it over his head again and again and flung it into the sky. And in the process, the bear's tail got all stretched out, because we all know that's what happens when you pull hard enough on a bear's tail. It is not, for the record. Please do not try that at home. So this is Ursa Major, the Great Bear. And if you have an Ursa Major, it's a pretty good bet that somewhere in the sky there is an Ursa Minor, a little bear. And you can use the Big Dipper to find it, which is one of the handy things about the Big Dipper. So take the two stars at the front of the bowl. So here's the dipper. Take the two stars at the front of the bowl and just draw a line in between them and extend that line out into space. And they bring you to this star right here. And this star is the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. It's also Polaris, the North Star. And the Little Dipper is also 7 stars. It's like the Big Dipper, but much fainter. So 1, 2, 3 stars in the handle. 1, 2, 3, 4 stars in the bowl. So there's the Little Dipper. There's the Big Dipper underneath it. And unlike the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper is a constellation. It's just, it's not called Little Dipper. It's called Ursa Minor, the little bear, who has an even longer tail than the big bear does. I personally always thought that the long-tailed space bear must just be a species that we don't know about yet, because there seem to be several of them. Now, this is the time of year where if you're going out observing in the early evening, shortly after sunset, the Big Dipper is getting really hard to see. It's really low. Like I said, it's not going to go below the horizon, but unless you have a totally clear northern horizon, you're going to have a hard time seeing it because it is very low. And we don't usually have a totally clear horizon. We usually have trees or buildings or something in the way. Fortunately, the Big Dipper is not the only group of stars that can help you find Polaris, the North Star, if you're looking for Polaris or if you're looking for the Little Dipper or the Little Bear. There's another nice, bright group of stars almost directly opposite the Big Dipper. So here's the Big Dipper. There's Polaris. The group of stars I'm talking about is right here. Right now, it's kind of making a number 3. And this is actually a pattern that's relatively easy to spot in the sky if you have a, maybe not in the middle of Boston, but pretty much anywhere outside the city, you can spot this pattern relatively easy. It can be a 3, an E, an M, a W, depending on where it is in the sky and how it's oriented. And when the Big Dipper is low, this pattern is high in the sky because they're almost opposite each other. So like I said, it makes sort of a W shape or a 3 shape. And the central peak kind of points to Polaris. It's not exact. It actually points to the bowl of the Big Dip, of the Little Dipper. But if you take that central peak, it will get you into the right neck of the woods. And Polaris is the brightest star there. So it helps you find Polaris that way if the Big Dipper is too low for you to be able to see. Now this WM E3-shaped constellation is another one that looks absolutely nothing like what it is supposed to be. This is supposed to be a woman on a throne. I don't know how they got there, frankly. But its name is Cassiopeia the Queen. So there she is, Cassiopeia the Queen on her throne. And she is almost directly opposite the North Star from the Big Dipper. So these three groups of stars, the bear, the two bears, and the Queen, they are all circumpolar, which means you can always see them from the latitude of Boston. They're always above the horizon. And when the Big Dipper gets really low towards the horizon and is hard to spot, that's when Cassiopeia is very nice and high and easy to spot. And when Cassiopeia gets very, very low to the horizon, that's when the Big Dipper is nice and high. So it means that you can always use one of them to help you find the North Star if you are looking for it. So that is our northern circumpolar sky. The rest of the sky, as we turn away from the north, this is stuff that is going to rise across the sky and set, which means it's not always up. And setting earlier and earlier are a pair of objects that we've been watching all summer. They're quite close together in the sky right now. Nice and bright, easy to spot. These guys are not stars. They are planets. Now, if you can see a planet with just your eyes, so no binoculars, no telescope, that either means that it is close to Earth, so it's one of the small rocky planets, or it's far away from Earth, but it is really, really, really huge, so it's a gas giant. And what we have here are a pair of gas giants. In fact, we have Jupiter and Saturn. So Jupiter is the brighter of the two. Makes sense. It's much closer to us and it's the bigger of the two planets. If you do have binoculars or a telescope, it's worthwhile taking them out to look at Jupiter, which is again a nice bright target. It doesn't take much magnification to show off a couple of its moons. It has 4 particularly large moons. We call them the Galilean moons because 400 years ago, Galileo saw them through a very, 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 very terrible telescope. It really doesn't take much to see them. And he watched from night to night as they changed their position around Jupiter. And that was an indication that they were actually orbiting Jupiter, which meant not everything orbited the Earth, which is 1610s was a weird idea. Of course, now we know the only thing really orbiting the Earth that we didn't put there was the moon. So you can go out and you can spot these 4 largest moons of Jupiter. Their names are Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. And they are some of the fascinating worlds all on their own. Io, the most volcanic place in the solar system. Europa, home to a liquid water underground ocean. Ganymede, the biggest moon in the solar system, bigger than the planet Mercury. And Callisto, one of the oldest surfaces, one of the most unchanged surfaces in the entire solar system. And you can spot them as tiny points of light next to Jupiter if you look at Jupiter through binoculars or through a telescope. Now, next to Jupiter in the sky, still much brighter than the stars around it, blends in a little bit better, will be Saturn. So Saturn also is a bit of a show off if you happen to have binoculars or a telescope. It likes to show off its rings. Does not take much magnification to see the rings. Galileo was also able to see Saturn's rings. He just didn't recognize that they were rings. He wasn't sure what was going on. He kind of thought it looked like the planet had ears. Again, the 1610s were a weird time. So you can spot those rings. If you've got a fairly clear night and a decent telescope, you may be able to spot Saturn's largest moon, Titan, which is a crazy little world all on its own as well. It has an atmosphere, unlike pretty much any other moon in the solar system. It rains on Titan and there are rivers and lakes. It's just not liquid water, it's liquid methane because Titan is about 300 degrees below zero. Very, very cold out there in that part of the solar system. I'm going to take a moment to pause now, Katie, and ask if there are any questions I should answer before I keep going.
We don't have any questions coming in, but I do want to give a shout out to all the people who guessed correctly that those were Jupiter and Saturn.
Excellent. And they are not the only planets that we can spot in the night sky tonight. So they are sort of right after sunset. You can see they're going to be in the southern sky, sort of towards the southwest. But they are not the only ones. Over in the east, we have nice and bright, another planet. And since we have people guessing which planets these are, go ahead and make a guess which planet you think this one is. Over here in the east.
All right, we have guesses coming in. We have both Mars and Venus as guesses.
Are both very good guesses. Now, Venus, of course, does appear nice and bright in our sky. It is the third brightest natural object that appears in the sky after the sun and the moon. The thing about Venus is that since it's closer to the sun than we are, when we see it from here on Earth, we don't ever see it that far from the sun. It usually either follows the sun below the horizon at night and we sort of as the evening star, or it precedes the sun up in the morning as the morning star. It's never too far from the sun. And this object is on the opposite side of the sky from the sun, which means we know it can't be Venus. And also it can't be Mercury, although Mercury is really hard to spot. So, which leaves, of course, Mars. And one of the ways you can tell it's Mars in the sky is it will have this reddish color to it. You know, cultures all over the world, Mars, of course, was the god of war. It also has names from other cultures in associating it with war, with fire, with blood, with things that are red, because it does have this reddish color to it. It is, of course, the red planet. Now, this is a great time to go find Mars in the sky because it just passed what we call opposition, which is when it is closest to Earth. So in its orbits, when the two planets, because of course they're both moving around the sun, they're both constantly changing their position. Opposition occurred a few weeks back, and that's when the two planets were closest. And so Mars is still pretty bright in the sky right now. You can look at this one through binoculars or your telescope. It's going to look like a slightly bigger red dot. But this one has a spacecraft on the way to it as we speak, the Perseverance spacecraft, which launched in very late July and is due to arrive in February. It is still on its way. It's going to be our next rover. It's on the way to Mars as we speak. Now, Mars tonight is very close to a constellation I really like to look at this time of the year. It's my sort of anchor constellation for autumn because it is very prominent in the autumn sky. And the best way to find it is to look for, right now, tonight, it's going to be just above Mars in the sky, this square shape right here. And this square has a couple of names. It's just like the Big Dipper. The square is not a constellation. It's a piece of a constellation. We sometimes call it the autumn square because it is very prominent in the autumn sky. It is more well known as the Great Square of Pegasus. Now, Pegasus in mythology was a flying horse, and half of him is in the sky. Only half. Fortunately for us, it is the front half. So the square is his body coming off of this corner. There is a neck and a head right there. And then coming off of this corner are his two front legs. So there he is. And you'll see he's also pretty close to Cassiopeia in the sky. So just to orient us, there's our northern sky right there. Just sort of south of Cassiopeia, taking up a nice big chunk of the eastern sky at 5:30 this evening will be the front half of Pegasus, the flying horse. And once again, I'm not sure that's what I would have called it if, I was in charge of naming things. What would you have called this constellation if you were the one in charge of naming it? Go ahead and put an answer in the Q&A. And again, it's just whatever you think it looks like, so there's no wrong answer.
All right, looking for creative crowdsourcing for our own nicknames. We have so far coming in a jellyfish. I think it looks a bit like a kite, a three-legged chair.
I have to say I personally agree with the jellyfish, or I've always thought this was some sort of tentacled ocean creature, jellyfish, octopus, squid, something like that. But that's not what it's supposed to be. It is supposed to be an upside down, half a flying horse. Interestingly enough. Now, this is a bit of a weird constellation. It's a rarity. It's a constellation that actually shares a star with another constellation. This back corner of the square is actually also the top of another constellation that comes off in this direction right over here. I have always wondered, still wondering to this day, why this constellation is not simply the back legs of the horse, but it's not. So if you imagine that this right here is a separate constellation, what would you name it? This right here, not the rest of the horse, but just this, where the back end of the horse should be. What would you call this one if you were in charge of naming it? And don't worry about getting it right, because this is one that really doesn't look anything like what it's supposed to be. I'm not even really sure what I think it looks like.
I'm also trying to think. Kind of reminds me of like something I would use at the gym to pick things up and put things down. All right, we have answers coming in. A boat is one of our guesses. A crown. Another boat. Seem to be the top ones.
All right, boat. I see a boat now. Okay. So this is not a boat. It is not fitness equipment. It is, in fact, Cassiopeia's daughter. So you have the Queen Cassiopeia right here. You have the Princess Andromeda. That totally looks like a princess, right? Yeah. It does not. But that is exactly where the back end of the horse should be, is actually the Princess Andromeda. And she's usually shown chained in the artwork like this. She's part of a whole story where she was actually going to be sacrificed to a sea monster. So she's usually shown chained because she's usually, they imagine she's being sacrificed. Don't worry, she didn't get sacrificed. She gets saved. So the story does have a happy ending for her. She is the daughter of Queen Cassiopeia. She's right below her in the sky, and she is where the back legs of the horse would be found. And the easiest part of Pegasus or Andromeda to find is that square. It is the brightest part of the constellation, and it's nice and prominent, and this is the time of year to go looking for Pegasus. He is huge. He is spread across a nice big chunk of that autumn sky. This is his time of year to reign. But just in case you're getting comfortable, and just in case this nice warm weather is making you confident, I'm going to fast forward time just a couple of hours to 9:30. So 9:30, not that late. Look who's on the horizon. You may recognize this group of stars. We also have the moon rising over here, which looks like a full moon, but if I zoom in, you will see it's not. It's a third quarter moon. It's just the way the program shows it. But you may recognize this handsome fellow over here just rising in the east at 9:30, or you may recognize a part of him anyway. There's a part of him that is very famous. So who do you think that is? I'll give you a hint. This is the part of him that's very famous. Bet you've heard of that part.
No guesses coming in yet.
Guesses?
Oh, just that it's a man.
It is. He's famous for his belt.
Orion, there we go.
And there he is. And this is both exciting and makes me sad at the same time. Orion is one of my favorite constellations. It is a nice, bright, easy to spot constellation. And it's already starting to rise at 9:30 in the evening. That's not that late. What makes me sad is that just like Pegasus is my anchor constellation for the fall, Orion's my anchor constellation for the winter, which means the winter sky is rising, just in case we were getting complacent, enjoying this beautiful mid-autumn weather. The winter sky is already starting to rise in later in the evening, and just to let us know that don't get too complacent. Winter is coming. It's on the way. So if you feel like if you're still up at 9:30, you can look to the eastern sky, and he'll be getting higher and higher in the sky after that. You can look for Orion in his famous belt, or just wait a few months and he will be what's up in the sky shortly after sunset. Now I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions. So Katie, if any questions come in that I should try and answer, I make no guarantees, but I will try.
I don't think we have any questions yet. Oh, we have, where is Pluto?
Where is Pluto? I'm not actually sure where Pluto is in the sky, but one of the cool things about this program is it does have a search window. So let's see where Pluto is. Let's find out. It is below the horizon. It's somewhere down here in the southwest, or in the west southwest. So it is not above the horizon at 9:30. It looks like it's going to be rising. It's a sort of part of the sky that would be rising much later, be in the sky around midnight. You'd need a really big telescope to see it either way. So.
And how much of the United States or Canada, like how far out from Boston is seeing a similar sky to us?
So nowhere in the United States or Canada, or at least southern parts of Canada, are going to be very different from this. And anywhere across the northern United States is going to have pretty much the same sky. The farther south you go, the further to the north these things will be, and the further north you go, they'll be a little farther south. So there's nowhere in North America or Canada that you're not going to be able to see Pegasus or Orion. You're going to be able to see Cassiopeia and the Big Dipper. The farther south you go, the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia may not be circumpolar if you go far enough south, but you will be able to see the North Star, Polaris, and the Little Dipper. So the sky won't be super different, but it may be a little different. And you'll still be able to see the planets.
We have a few more questions. A kindergarten class wants to know, is there a constellation for money?
Money? I don't know that there is in the 88 official constellations. So like I said, we tend to use the Greek and Roman ones as the official constellations. I'm trying to think. There are a lot of southern constellations that I don't know as well, but I don't think any of them are money. They tend to be birds or scientific instruments like microscopes or telescopes and things like that. No, I don't think there's any that are money that I know of. At least, again, not the Greek and Roman ones, but there may be ones like that from other cultures.
Awesome. And there's also a question, Talia, that you might know. Is there an app that tells what stars or planets are in the sky? So you could just maybe point your camera upward and it would identify for you?
There are not ones that will identify it that I know of based on a camera. There are ones that your phone can use that will base on your GPS and the compass inside your phone. So I know that's how like Google Sky works, for instance. It uses the phone's GPS to figure out where you are, and the gyroscope or whatever it is inside that tells the phone what orientation it's in to figure out what you're looking at. They're not 100%, but if you're trying to see what's that really, really bright thing, they're usually pretty good for that. If you're trying to find something really faint, I don't recommend using them. But if you're like, is that Jupiter or is that Saturn? Then an app like that would be useful for that. But I don't know of any that like uses the camera to look at the sky and then tell you what you're looking at.
Maybe next year.
Maybe next year.
All right, well, I think those are the questions that we have time for today. So I'm going to say thank you to Talia and invite you to turn your camera off, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
And I also want to say thank you to everybody, all of you scientists that joined us today and made those amazing observations or asked those wonderful questions. One more screen to show you all. So if you enjoyed today's program, you can always find more of our programs, more of what's going on at www.mos.org/mos@home. And if you'd like to support more of these programs to continue happening, we'd love to have you visit engage.mos.org. And again, the program that Talia was using today is called Stellarium. So you can visit www.stellarium.org and actually download it and use it yourself and figure out what's going on in the sky tonight. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.